they did more anti-China stuff. That's so funny. They're just so ingratiated. I mean, it all began with um, Matt Stoller, right? That hack. I'm not afraid to say that anymore because this dude really tried to debate me on Brianna Joy Gray's call-in, and it was an absolute and utter joke. In my opinion, for me, it was a joke. I was like, I had 100-degree fever. I was like, just it was coming out all areas for me. And this dude really tried to call me like a Nazi and all this ridiculous stuff. But that's where all this comes from. People like that, people from the American Enterprise Institute, these kind of libertarian, anti-communist think tanks. Hudson Institute is where the connection with Breaking Points is because of Sagar. That's a neocon think tank. I wouldn't even call it libertarian, but I guess economically it would probably consider itself libertarian. But it's very much so a neocon think tank. And so I don't believe you can't believe anything that Breaking Point says about China or really anything about foreign policy for that matter. Uh, they're not they're just not solid on that. And when it comes to China, it's just straight out neocon, yellow peril, new Cold War style racism. There's not even any any doubt about that. There's no doubt about that at all. It is just new Cold War style racism. And so I've been hearing about a housing crisis in China. I mean, the slogan in China is housing is for living, not for speculation. And so that means China does have to deal with this. Again, reform and opening up meant the rapid development of the housing system, the ability to rapidly develop the cities so that people could live in them. There was a reliance in some private investment for that. Not all. I mean, the land is still public, but there was a lot of private real estate that did build up. They built it up off of the state-owned banks and their development funds. But nonetheless, this has been a problem, the cost of housing. Now, a housing crisis means kind of similar to the United States and the West. It means that people are underwater, that there are bad mortgages, people can't pay them, all of that. The China's government makes sure that regardless of people's housing situation, that these mortgages, all of that is highly regulated, that payments, interest, all of that is forgiven if it's necessary, that those developers, right, there was a problem with certain projects that were being built that never got built, and yet people were still saddled with mortgages for them because there is a huge housing boom in China. We saw it when we went there. There's just buildings going up, and people are buying them in advance. And then when they don't get built in time, they're still saddled with payments, despite the fact that they're not living there. And that was a big part of some issues that were going on. But to say there's a crisis, it just doesn't fit with the reality of the situation. Now, housing is very expensive in the cities, and this is something that the government in China is going to address. It has been addressing, needs to address more. That's going to happen. That is a problem. Now, there isn't really a homelessness crisis or even an eviction crisis because most people still have connections in the countryside. A lot of people still live there, right? It's becoming more parity between the countryside and the cities, but still a lot of people live in the cities and they in the countryside and go back and forth. Now, in the cities though, still, even though it's very expensive, most people own their homes. Most people can do that because of the way that finance is more government directed and the terms of loans are a lot easier to manage and the speculation is a lot less. And so people, I think home ownership rate in China is still 90+%. In the US, it's like 30 percentage points lower. It's somewhere between 61, 62%. So a crisis, I would say no, but I would say that yes, the cost of housing in the cities is something that's a problem that China is addressing. It's part of this campaign to make housing for living, not for speculation. But still, the situation in China is a lot more favorable in terms of housing than in the United States. The cost has gone up. The cities are very hard to live in, but still people have a place to live. And because incomes have risen, because of China's culture, some say it's a savings culture, but also there's just a lot of disposable income that's just not understood. A lot of people have, there's a good number of people, right? You always say that 300 million people are middle class. No, those folks are workers who have a lot of disposable income. That's basically what middle class is. And so these families, they are buying homes, they are living in them. And so there really isn't a housing crisis. And anyone fear mongering about that is just repeating this Gordon Chang nonsense. Because usually when you hear housing crisis, you think, oh, there's going to be economic collapse. And here's the coming collapse of China. Yada, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. It's, to me, just, it's not real. It's not true. And it's just more it's deflection. It's all a way to project onto China what's happening in the United States. In the United States, there is a housing crisis. In the United States, that's just always the case. In China, you go to the major cities, you will not find people sleeping outside. You will not find, you will find people sometimes selling to tourists like goods and items, but you won't find the same kind of panhandling, the same kind of sleeping rough, the same kind of just massive just impoverishment of just so many people, right? You won't find tent cities, none of that. You won't find any of that in China. Not in the major cities, not in the countryside where people do have a place to live. I mean, that's been a big part of the poverty alleviation program is updating, renovating, relocating people in the countryside who need to, so their conditions can get better so they can live more fulfilling, more prosperous lives. So breaking points, they're always just lying about China. They have an obsession with China because Sagar works for the Hudson Institute. He has an obsession with China. They're all neocons there. And so to me, it's questionable. Why partner with these Beltway warmongering think tanks? I got the model in the beginning, right? The model in the beginning for the rising, right? It was this, oh, well, if we have the right and the so-called left, although I don't think Crystal Ball is really left, I think she's a liberal. But if we get someone who's on that side of the political spectrum and on the right side of the political spectrum, it makes for great television, and we'll get everyone. We'll get Bernie people from Trump people. That literally was the model. It was to really kind of just hit that algorithm by getting all of those different viewers. And now I can't say it's a dumb strategy. It definitely wasn't a stupid strategy. But of course, both sides, the Bernie side, right, the so-called left, which to me Bernie Sanders is, I mean, you call him left, yeah, but he's in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is a right-wing party. Trump, some people call him communist. It's hilarious. He's in the GOP. That's a right-wing party. So you have two right-wing parties. You have two, maybe you could say, outsider elements of those parties talking together, and it's good for ratings, but it's not good for politics on China. It's just not. It's not good for anti-war politics, anti-imperialist politics. It's not good for those things. So that's why you should come to a show like this, where it's consistently anti-imperialist. We're not playing duopoly politics here. I don't do that. There's no duopoly politics here that I lean on, right? We're here to condemn the duopoly. We're here to really talk about China in a way that reflects the reality of the situation, and also reflects, I think, the position and the posture that we need to take toward this question, because we can't be falling into new Cold War traps. When we do that, we are just satisfying the military-industrial complex. We're just satisfying the imperialists. Your ratings, that to me, that means nothing. That means absolutely nothing. Your ratings don't matter. You don't matter. Your income doesn't matter. Your journalism career doesn't matter. Rising, breaking points, none of that matters. That's all blip. That's a blip. That's sure, you may think you matter because you have people who, live out in the suburbs, drinking their coffee, saying, "Ooh, let me listen to how they report the news," because they're copying the corporate media model of how to report the news. And oh yeah, they'll also tickle my anti-China fancy because I've been so propagandized, and I would like to sit atop a throne of Chinese skulls, as that guest on Fox News on Tucker Carlson's program. What is his name? Joe Kelly, was it? I forget his name. He's some right wing hack, but there are a lot of people who think like this, and that's who they're attracting with these kind of politics. Neocons, warmongers, people who support war, people who are racists, yellow peril folks, mainly white people with money. That's not what we do here, though. We don't do that on this channel. We certainly, I certainly appreciate all the support you're able to give. If you can, subscribe on Patreon, help me out with all of these costs to keep this channel up by subscribing there, by sending super chats, all of that, by subscribe on Substack, all those things. I appreciate all of that, but I will never, just for the sake of an algorithm, whatever, I won't just change up how I think about things. I'm always trying to figure out how I can talk to people so people can understand it, but I can't change up principles for popularity or algorithms or anything like that. I'm just going to do the hard work and hopefully it pays off, which, in the main, it really has.